Our circumstances don't define us. Our actions do. We all have moments of impact. What are you going to do with yours? Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Living the Sweet Life. I'm your host, TJ Sweet, and I'm incredibly grateful that you're here today. We are going to dive into two, maybe three of the things that we talk about every week on this podcast about reshaping mindsets, living with intention, and look at the world through a grateful lens. Really what that is it's helping us see the world differently. And today we're going to refer to that as our perspective of the world, of our lives, of our relationships, of ourselves. And oftentimes perspective is really rooted in how we see things, but also how we feel about the things and the people that we get to have in our lives. And, you know, perspective is something that often comes at the other side of pain. It comes at the other side of regret or shame even. And I'm going to share a story today of kind of how something that transformed my life. And, Tony Robbins even shares a really great story about his life that I'll dive into here in a second. But I first want to thank you for tuning in. I want to thank you for subscribing and for making comments and for suggesting ideas for content that you want to hear about that's relevant for you. And this episode's near and dear to me because really my perspective of life, of myself, of what I want to do for the rest of my life completely changed 13 years ago. And it came from a singular moment that then also deepened with additional moments. One of them will be the story that I'm going to share with you today about a car crash that I probably shouldn't have walked away from. But I did, and I gained perspective pretty quick on that. And I've seen it repeated over and over again in my life as far as how my new perspective has really transformed the way that I respond to adversity and respond to challenges. So thank you for subscribing. Thank you for being here. Let's get right into it. So when it comes to perspective, like I said, oftentimes it comes at the other side of pain or tragedy or adversity and or loss even. And it comes because whenever we're familiar with things, we start to lose its sense of importance. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And so I want to kind of dive in a little bit to the story that kind of inspired some of this as I've been, kind of really looking at how to help people shift their perspective without needing the wake-up call. And that's really going to be the root of this episode today. And so I really want to kind of give a couple of the stories that have really resonated with me, that really kind of made me think about my perspective, but also other people that have shifted their perspective. And, Tony Robbins talks about his Thanksgiving story when he was a young boy and a stranger came to the door, knocked on the door and gave his family food on Thanksgiving. And his family wasn't very well off. His dad was struggling, and his mom was reminding him of how much his dad was struggling. And the stranger knocked on the door and brought food and said, "We want to give this to you, not because you need it, but because we want to help you take care of your family." And obviously the story goes on about his dad kind of being angry about it and so on and so forth. But they ended up taking the food eventually. And but really, what Tony talks about is his perspective shifted that strangers care. And that even just food matters. Something so simple, showing up for people to do that matters. But the message about strangers care really made Tony's life completely transform because he recognized that he wanted to then care for strangers. And he so did that through food. And so now he's given away, I think he's at 100 billion meals that he's working on right now. I think he's at 62 billion meals, 62 billion, that's what I said. But it started with one person pouring into him that changed his perspective. And, for most of us, the perspective arrives late. He was 11 years old when that happened. But today I want to dive into how can we actually bring that kind of shock, that kind of perspective without having to go through, being in a very negative place or being in a very toxic or very unhealthy or being in such a tragic place in our lives. So really what I'm doing here today, I'm going to talk about how I've made a decision about how I want to live my life. I don't want to wait for something bad to happen. I don't want to wait for loss before I already appreciate everything I have in my life. I don't need to lose it to appreciate it. The amount of times I've said that to the people I love and care the most about is it's something that I don't just say because it sounds nice. It's actually something where like I don't have to lose you to appreciate you. But oftentimes we do have to lose things to appreciate things just because we don't see it for what it is. We see it for what it's doing for us. So today we're going to walk through a little bit more. I'm going to, again, share my story on that I want to kind of resonate with you around kind of a perspective shifting moment. Obviously, some of you have already heard the story about Birdie, my dog, of which I is kind of like my main message whenever I talk about how I was transformed through gratitude for the rest of my life. And that's really what I'm here to do today is to kind of give you a moment for you to stop and think about your life and think about maybe some perspective that you've gained through a tougher time. So the first thing is I want to tell you about my story. My second part of my keynote that I share is a car wreck and how this moment kind of changed my perspective on life in general and how I was treating every day. And so it was a cold, rainy night in February of 2020. Yes, pre-COVID. It was actually probably like a day before COVID kind of came along. But I went to Walgreens to find some medicine because I was feeling a cold coming on. And so I went to Walgreens, driving home on a 2-lane road, and again, cold, dark, rainy night. And I was driving by myself. And full transparency here, I didn't have my seatbelt on, which kind of tells you where my headspace was, right? Kind of taking things for granted and not doing the things that are required whenever you actually care and you see purpose in your life. I was kind of taking it for granted. And I started to sneeze. And I have a sneeze that is the sneeze of all sneezes. It is powerful, and I do 3 every time. And when you're going at high speeds and you start sneezing and it's raining and it's dark, you don't see that a car stopped right in front of me. So there was a car that stopped to make a turn. She had her blinker on. She was doing everything appropriately. I just didn't. I started sneezing, didn't have enough time to see. And I slammed into the back of her car. She was in a much bigger car than I was in. And luckily, there was a bridge with a creek. But luckily, my car, I was able to roll just a foot past that and into this kind of open area. Again, it's a 2-lane road. There isn't a lot of that around. But I pulled off into this 2-lane road. I kind of remember that a little bit, but I don't really remember a ton. And all the airbags in my car deployed. My head hit the windshield. Again, I told you I wasn't belted in. So if this serves as a reminder for you, buckle up every time. Not because you feel like you should, not because the beep's going to annoy you, but because you care about the people in your life and you care about showing up for them. There's purpose. There's something bigger for you to do in your life. And yes, I buckle up every time now. And so what happened, I recognized that all the airbags deployed. I slammed my chest into the steering wheel. My head hit the windshield. There's pictures of this that I share with people. I don't really have a great sense of time about how long this took, but I got out of the car, squeezed through the airbags, and walked over to the person that I hit, and I knocked on her window. And she looked at me like she was scared and I don't know. It was shocked. And I just said, "I'm so sorry. I was so sorry that I bothered her and that I interfered with her evening." And she rolled her window down. She was bawling. And she said, "I thought you were dead." So that obviously gives me some sort of sense that I was probably unconscious at some point whenever I hit my head like that. And I don't remember how long. Again, there was no sense of time in this moment, but she said, "I thought you were dead." And I just apologized profusely. And her car was barely damaged. Like I said, she was in a much bigger car than I was in. And she just said, "I'm just so glad you're okay." And so she said, "It's not a big deal at all." So I called my friend Cliff. And I just said, "Hey, I was in a car wreck. Do you mind coming up here? I'm going to need a ride at some point here." So he drops everything like my friends do. I'm grateful for them. But he dropped everything and drove up there. And he pulls up and he looks at me and he's like, I'll never forget this moment. Because he stopped and looked at me and said, "There's no way you should have been able to walk out of that car." And he said, "God is not done with you yet. Don't waste it." Now, there's more to that story, where a police officer comes. Obviously, we call the police. He comes and says, I hope that guy who's in the car, hope he's okay, to me. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I hope that guy's okay. I hope he makes it. And I said, no, I am that guy that was in the car. And he just said, well, you should consider yourself very lucky that you survived that. So now I have 3 people telling me that they thought I was dead, that God's not done with me yet, and that I'm extremely lucky. These police officers see these things all the time. So really in that moment, as I'm sitting there, I'm not thinking about the car crash. I'm not thinking about the inconvenience. I'm not thinking about insurance premiums. I'm not thinking about having to buy a new car. I'm only in that moment, because of those 3 people sharing that perspective for me. I'm only thinking about, what am I going to do for the rest of my life with the rest of my life? Because I feel like I used one of my free passes in that car wreck. And my perspective of life has changed. Yes, I've been pouring into gratitude for longer than that. I've been pouring into purpose and connection for much longer than that. But perspective moments can happen often. But I didn't need a car wreck to recognize that God had something bigger for me to do. But I did need that. So my goal today is to talk more about how do you not need the car crash? How do you not need the loss? How do you not need to be in despair to gain that same life transforming perspective shift, right? This is that looking at the world through a grateful lens, but it's also reshaping your mindset and thinking the things that you see as obligations are actually opportunities. The things that are stressors are privileges, right? We've talked about pressure being a privilege. Maybe how do you then start to see the world a little bit differently without having to go through the pain and adversity? That's my hope for you today. But the real thing about this is this is something that there isn't anybody who just wakes up with this perspective without thinking about it, without working on it. It's a practice. It's something that we do consistently. It's about presence. It's not about cruise control. Because the truth of the matter is comfort, no matter what the thing is, the excitement of obtaining something is much more invigorating than keeping something. And no matter what it is, and unless we apply meaning and purpose to it. That's what we're going to do today, because comfort kind of numbs awareness and pain removes distractions. So I'm going to say that again with perspective. Comfort numbs awareness and pain removes distractions, but we don't need the pain and numbness to, kind of make this transition that we're talking about today. But we don't lose perspectives because we're ungrateful. So I want you to give yourself that grace. We don't lose perspectives. We don't recognize something as not as important because we're not grateful for it. Because I have a lot of people say, I'm really grateful for it, but it also stresses me out. It's also frustrating. It's also, infuriating. It's pressure. It's all these different things. We lose perspective because, when we're so comfortable with something, when we're so familiar with something, it dulls appreciation. And, our brains are incredibly efficient, right? We look for patterns, we look for certainty, we look for comfort. It adapts really, really fast. This is that perspective shift. That's why when those moments happen, we don't have to spend months thinking about what we just learned. We automatically know it. But once something becomes familiar, it stops in our brains as registering as something special. Think about the car you're driving. Think about the clothes you wear. Thinking about the phone you have. Think about the partner in life you have. Think about the job you have. Something, when it becomes familiar, stops registering in our brains as special. A couple more examples of this is when we have a lot of problems in our lives, that we will say problems, when we're healthy. But when we're unhealthy, we have one problem, and it's sickness. So health even becomes invisible until we become sick. I've had 5 knee surgeries in the last few years. Walking was very comfortable until I couldn't walk for 2 straight years. Time feels abundant until it isn't, until we wish we had more. And people become constants in our lives, things that we can just rely on, sunrises and sunsets and people, until they're gone. Not because we don't care. Right? I want you to think about that again. It's not because we don't care about these people. It's because our comfort, our certainty, our familiarity creates a sense of numbness. And that's why perspective often shows up, dressed up in the appearance of pain. But here's the shift that changes everything. Perspective does not require loss. it requires intention. Intention. Living with intention. It's what we do here. It's what all of you do. It's what you're seeking to do more of. So perspective doesn't require loss. It requires intention. Tragedy doesn't create meaning. It reveals it by removing all of those distractions that we previously had. Tragedy doesn't create meaning. It removes the distractions so that we can see the meaning. So I want to dive into a few different ways that I do that I've found are incredibly impactful when it comes to, how to build perspective now before you wish you would have. So the first thing is this idea of voluntary contrast. This can be a little stressful at times, but whenever you do it, it puts you into a moment of meaning. And so tragedy forces contrast. It's immediate. Like you can't think about anything other than wishing you would have and whatever it may be. But we can choose the perspective. We can choose the contrast instead of waiting for tragedy to do it for us. So here are 3 questions that I've asked myself a lot that you can ask yourself today, right now. What would this moment mean if the thing that you're stressed about, angry about, maybe the person that you have in your life, the things you have in your life, whatever it is, I need you to think about something that you feel like you've taken for granted. What would this moment mean if that were taken away? Like this moment right now, if that thing were gone, what would this moment mean and what would you be thinking? Second thing is, how would you see it if you had a second chance? So imagine you lost it. How would you treat it? How would you see it if you had a second chance? And then thirdly, what part of your life has become invisible because it's so familiar? What part of your life has become numb, kind of just transient, it kind of just comes and goes because it's become so familiar? Now, that's not negativity. I'm not trying to have you think about, a negative thing or something that's going to be hurtful, because losing something you love, the reason why it's so powerful is because you've loved. Losing something you've never loved isn't really that painful. That's why people love discarding items that they said they saved up all their money for to go buy, and then they sell it for $1 at a garage sale. It's not actually keeping the thing and cherishing the thing and appreciating the thing. It's actually acquiring the thing is where we put all of our effort. But acquiring the thing, we think it's going to make us feel a certain way. And so the same thing in relationships, how you start a relationship, how you are with somebody in the beginning. We don't live in that place of the same headspace and the same mindset and the same efforts. But if you go back and start treating that person and seeing that person like you did in the beginning, even though they've grown, even though you've both changed and evolved, how you think about that person is going to be how you treat the relationship. The reason why we do all the extra effort in the beginning in relationships is because it's new and because it's emotionally creating this sense of, I don't want to lose this. I want to have this. I'm going to bring up something else here in a second, because this is also the piece of relationships and things that can create this sense of connection, but not the sense of complacency. Okay. So the second thing is I want to shift. So first thing is those 3 questions. What would this moment mean if that was taken away from you, whatever the thing you're thinking about right now? And how would you treat it and see it differently if you got a second chance? And then also, what part of your life has become familiar or has become invincible because that thing has become so familiar for you? That's going to help you create some clarity. The second thing is shifting from ownership to stewardship. And this is where in relationships, this is probably one of the most powerful things, or even a physical thing. But this one is huge, because how you think about the thing is going to determine how you treat the thing, how you cultivate it, how you feel about it when you're stressed, how you feel about it when you're happy. Okay. There's this sense of owning our lives and owning things and having people in our lives, but we're actually more entrusted with our life. Our time, our health, our relationships are all things that aren't just given to us. They're things that we have to cultivate and work on. So once we shift from owning to cultivating, right? So stewardship creates this sort of like reverence, and ownership creates this sense of entitlement. Ownership is this, it's mine, so I should, you have high expectations, but this idea of stewardship creates this sense of reverence. So when you treat your life and your relationships and your career and your finances like something you're responsible for and not entitled to, you start to show up differently. So what things are you thinking about right now that you've treated differently once you've received it? Because that's you focusing more on ownership and less on stewardship. Less on, and this is a perfect example of, and I've shared this story a bunch with people in my life too, but it's like to express real love and to show real love, it's actually showing care and concern for the people in our lives. And so if you stop and think about a flower grown up from the ground, and most of the time people say they love it and they want it, it's beautiful. So what do? Is they cut it so that they can have it. But the second they cut it, that flower starts dying. You can put it in water and do all the things, but it's meant to be in the soil, in the ground, in the sunshine, in the shade when it needs it, in the heat, all the things. But we often think, I want to own that because I love that, but we're basically saying it's about me owning the thing instead of me loving the thing. And so I want to give you a different perspective of maybe that same flower, maybe loving it. Again, this is a relationship thought as well. Maybe instead of cutting it and enjoying it for as long as you can before you deplete it of all of its resources, you water it. You make sure it has the sun. You put all the right soil around it. You fertilize it. You make sure that no bugs are around it. You make sure that nothing else can get to it. You protect it. You cultivate it. You serve it. You just appreciate it for what it is, not because you have it. That's the difference. If you can visualize, that's the difference between ownership and stewardship. Let's water more things. Let's make sure it has the right resources, the right relationships, the right conversations. Does it have the right space, the right time? That is more what's going to give us perspective of the thing. Instead of just cutting it to have it, it's cultivating it, to cherish it, to have it longer, and to appreciate it while we have it. Then the third thing is I want you to borrow perspective from the end. And this is where we kind of begin with the end in mind. We've talked about that a bunch of times, but think about, this is actually one of the most grounding things, one of the most humbling things, but we have this ability to think of our future selves and then look backwards. So imagine you're 90 years old, and if we're lucky enough to live that long, and you're given one ordinary day back today. You're given one ordinary day. You get the same stress, the same responsibilities, and the same people. You're 90 years old, and you look back, and you're given all the same things that you have in your life right now. I'm getting emotional even thinking about it, because we're actually living in the good old days right now. When we're older, we look back and think those were the good old days. But when we're in the good old days, we think further back and think those are the good old days. But we're actually in the good old days that 20 years from now, we're going to call the good old days. But like, I want the stress. I want the responsibilities, and I want the people. I'm not always going to have them, but I know what I would do if I had one more day with these people. Because when I'm 90, I'm not going to have my parents. I'm probably not going to have a lot of the same friends. And just that thought alone makes me think about them differently today. Even though I'm doing this podcast live on camera with you guys, you can see, you can probably hear through the mic. It's emotional to think about. Man, like, I don't want to take any of them for granted. But what suddenly feels meaningful? You can feel the emotion probably from me, but what suddenly feels meaningful? What stops feeling so urgent? We give so much urgency to the things that aren't actually the most important things, which is fair and reasonable. So just give yourself this moment to pause. But then what do you wish you would have slowed down for? Is it the walk? Is it the conversation? Is it the meal? Is it just time? That's wisdom, not regret. It's wisdom without the regret of wishing you would have. So now take yourself to your 90-year-old self and look back and think right now, what what are you often complaining about that you would give anything for to experience one more time? Then the fourth thing is about training your perspective on a daily basis. Okay, so this is that reflection that is required for us to gain experience and gain perspective, because perspective fades unless we practice it, right? This isn't something, oftentimes, even when we have that shock and awe moment, we have the loss, we have the tragedy, we have the regret, we say we're never going to do the thing again. It fades if we don't actually own that and practice that. So here are 3 things you can ask yourself at the end of the day, or even just on a daily basis. But what didn't have to go right today, but did? So like, what went right, even though you weren't the reason why it went right? Who would you miss if they weren't part of your day? Who would you miss if they weren't part of your day? And then what inconvenience is actually a privilege? And I think a lot of us in our lives, if we could shift our perspective completely, if we understand that we're not ever actually meant to, we don't want to have 0 problems in our life, because the things that we say are problems actually are privileges in our lives. I think we just want better skills to handle the problems differently so they don't feel the way that they do. But once you give up this idea that you're not meant to have 0 problems, that some problems are meant to happen, but problems get your attention, it cultivates effort, it makes you focus, brings clarity, you start to see the problems really more as a wake-up call or things to focus on instead of the thing causing you stress. Because when we think we have 0 problems, you just haven't been aware enough to recognize them. But perspective really isn't found in these big realizations, in these big moments. It can, but it doesn't have to be. It can be found in those small reminders of questions that you ask yourself every day. And so as I get close to wrapping up here, I really want to pour into this to really what I talk the most about, which is gratitude, purpose, and connection. And gratitude is perspective in action. Gratitude, being grateful for someone now, is perspective in action. Purpose is living like you already know what matters. You already know how much it matters. I would have put my seatbelt on. I would have been driving very differently. I would have been doing some things differently if I had a deeper sense of purpose back then. But purpose is living like you already know that you matter, your message matters, your relationship matters, that your partner, your business matters. And connection is what we notice when all the distractions fall away. So when that 90-year-old self looks back, you're going to think about people and connections. You're not going to think about another email. I hope not. Well, we don't know how many moments we're going to get. That is true. But we do get to decide how we're present for the people that we love and for the people that we get to create moments with. So tonight, I know I've given you a couple other things, but on this Mindset Monday, I really want you to think about, name one thing in your life that has become invisible or has lost its deeper sense of meaning that originally had meaning. That was very visible. It's all you could see, all you could focus on. What is something that's become invisible that it just because it's been familiar, not because it doesn't mean something to you, not because you don't love it, not because you don't care about it. But here's the other thing. Thinking about it is step 1, but that's not it. I want you to say it out loud and say out loud why it matters. Just like you just saw me getting emotional, say out loud why it matters. And then act tomorrow on Tuesday like you remember what you thought about on Monday. This is something you're going to have to do every day. And you're not going to be forced to do it. It's going to be something that you're going to be so incredibly glad that you did this moment of pausing, of thinking, what have I become numb to, and what's become so familiar that it's become invisible in my own life when it was used to be the only thing I could think about and see and look forward to. But because of our natural human nature of forgetting how important things are, attaching meaning and purpose, it's become invisible for us. So as I close here, there's just some powerful things I want to share with you. Again, this is I've already said some of these things, but perspective isn't something that tragedy gives us. It's something that we practice. It doesn't have to be something that tragedy gives us, but I don't want to live a life where the only thing that wakes me up, the only thing that gets my attention, gets me off of cruise control to grab the steering wheel again, is pain. I want to live alive and awake and on purpose. But if you wake up every day saying that, I don't want to live a life where the only thing that wakes me up is pain. I want to live a life awake and on purpose. Say that. If you say that, I guarantee you will live differently. You will start to treat each day and each relationship and each thing in your life differently. Perspective isn't a gift that tragedy gives us. It's a skill that we can practice now. It's a skill that we can practice. Now, if you learn how to do this so clearly while life is still good, which is right now, the good old days, you don't just avoid regret. You're going to build a life and meaningful relationships that you're proud of. You're going to build a life that you're proud of living. And so as I wrap up, I'm going to wrap this up every episode with something like this. This episode has brought out something in me. But my hope for you is that you don't wait for that wake-up call to reconnect with what matters most. But instead that you choose to notice it, honor it, and live it. Reconnect with what matters most and notice it, honor it, and live it. Cultivate it, pour into it, give your heart, give your mind to those things that matter the most. And I hope it starts for you today. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for subscribing. I'll see you at the next episode.